And over the years, we've been able to strengthen our economic cooperation within ASEAN. Yeah? Now, as the landscape in the world today changes, as the Yang Mohammed Prime Minister has suggested, yeah, the beginnings of protectionism, nationalism, and so on has begun to creep in to conversations along the way. Now, ASEAN has always been an open trading community. We've always stood by the fact that as the community can continue to trade, work together along the way, we can make pies bigger for everybody. A shared prosperity is a much better outcome along the way. While we cannot fully control what's happening outside from the challenges of the recent movements, but what we can do within ASEAN is better alignment within ASEAN. And in terms of better alignment, we would encourage ASEAN to focus about how do we make the cooperation within ASEAN stronger together. Focus about our regional comprehensive economic partnership that we actually have, and look at enabling more trade to occur along the way. And by doing that, and I think we can continue to create resilience within the system that we can manage. The second thing that the Prime Minister also focused on was actually making sure we expand the wings a little bit, and not just looking at what we can do within our own countries, what we can do inter-ASEAN, but also extend the ASEAN links across newer markets or older markets that we can step up along the way. And again, by creating better trade mechanisms and open trade mechanisms and so on, and promoting that will allow us to be able to manage the changes along the way. And I think over time, we'll see the reflection backwards that we need to go and come back to an open, freer trade. Will come back into the conversation because it's always been something that facilitated the growth in the world.
It's really about greater integration among ASEAN members at a time like this. But Minister Amir, when it comes to the negotiations that are perhaps going to be underway with the US, what is the approach here? Are we, all sending respective delegates? Are we negotiating as a bloc? Can you maybe clarify that?
I think the intention of ASEAN is to make sure that the core principles are key things that we stand on. And so the core principles of what ASEAN stands on is actually we are core facilitators for free trade. We are core facilitators to talk about fair trade along the way, and to talk about how do we make things better by making the pie bigger. And that's the core principle. We recognize there will be differentiation. The stage of development of each ASEAN country is very different from each other. We are clear also that the tariffs that are being proposed also has differentiation along the way. But rather than focus purely at, okay, we must have exactly the same response, but what we should do is go back to the core principles. We welcome open free trade. We welcome to do more things along the way. We welcome the concept of active engagement to get to a better outcome. Yeah? And I think by doing that practical mechanism, we can hold everybody to move towards the same directionality.
Minister Xi, I see you nodding away. ASEAN works on a basis of consensus. How much consensus are you seeing on this?
Well, I think I first want to thank Prime Minister Anwar for his very good speech earlier this morning, where he outlined a few very key principles in terms of how we want to respond to this tariff set by the US, and how should we as ASEAN work more closely together. So I think first, just as Indonesia and Malaysia, Singapore also believes that the response should not be one where we retaliate with more tariffs, because that will lead to the risk of a global trade war, which is not going to be good for the whole world. But instead, I think we want to engage the US in discussions and see how we can clarify some of the concerns that they may have. And importantly, perhaps even more importantly, to look at how we can further enhance the economic integration within our region. So if I focus on that for a moment, I would say there are three moves that I think we want to make, and they all end with up, so I would say it's the three ups. The first up is, I think we should open up. Open up opportunities for our companies open up trade links, investment projects within ASEAN, open up also the flow of data so that we're able to support the growth of the digital economy. The second up is team up. And I think this is an area where we need to look at how we can further strengthen the collaborations that we have in our region, both bilaterally. So PM mentioned about the Johor Singapore Special Economic Zone. We also have good collaboration projects with Indonesia, Batam, Bintan, Karimun, and also the more recent one, which is at Kendal Industrial Park at Semarang. So these are all examples of how bilaterally countries within ASEAN are able to work together. But importantly, as PM Anwar said, we want to achieve a demonstration effect, how collaboration can lead to a better win-win outcome for all, and encourage more countries to establish bilateral or also multilateral regional types of collaborative projects. And teaming up can also be in new emerging sectors. So if you talk about sustainability, how do we drive more investments in clean energy options? How do we encourage the development of new fuels that will be needed? Sustainable aviation fuel, for example. We want to reduce emissions for global aviation. A key solution would have to be increasing the supply of SAF, sustainable aviation fuel, and that will require investments. So I think teaming up is the second important area. And the last one, if I may be a little bit more direct here, is that we need to speed up. Because we have been talking about some of these integration projects, collaborations, for quite some time. And maybe previously we may think that we have time, we can discuss, we can take gradual steps. But with this shock that came with the tariffs, I think there must be a greater sense of urgency for us to now use this to rally our people, our companies, to make these moves, to deregulate, to reduce trade and non-trade barriers, and also, I think, to speed up the integration. And if we don't do it now, then when? So I think this is something which I hope we can work closely together. It'll be difficult sometimes to get all the ASEAN countries to come in all at the same time, because as Minister Amir said, some countries may be at different stages of development. But that doesn't mean that we cannot start with either bilateral projects or with a grouping of certain ASEAN member states. We can start first, get it going, and others are welcome to join in later when they are ready. One example that I think we should give it a bigger push is the ASEAN Power Grid. Between Singapore, Malaysia, and Indonesia, I think we are working very closely on this. This is going to be an important initiative that can help all the ASEAN countries to achieve better energy connectivity and resilience, because we provide backup for one another. And importantly, also encourage trading of energy that can then facilitate more investments into clean energy options.
I would like the Indonesian perspective, but just before that, since you raised this ASEAN grid integration, how soon can we expect this? You talk about speeding up. How much further of a speeding up, Minister Chi?
Well, I think it's going to be difficult to have the entire ASEAN power grid all up all at one go, because ASEAN, unlike Europe is pretty much a landmass. Ours, we are spread out. But what we can do is identify the grid in different parts of ASEAN. So we can start with different, more regional grids first, and then eventually try and stitch them up into an ASEAN power grid. But we've got to start where we find areas where such interconnectivity will be very mutually beneficial for all the countries involved. And we start to make those investments, and later on the grid can be connected as a whole.
So let's talk about trade still, because I think that is really the dominant concern for investors. When it comes to Indonesia, I understand they're sending a high-level delegation to Washington. What is Indonesia offering to the US?
Okay, Avril, before I answer that question, I think it's important to define what the challenges are for Indonesia, all right? The tariffs that have been hit by the Trump administration is 32% for us. It's quite hefty, right? We are projecting a net decrease of Indonesian exports up to 2%, and possible decrease even in GDP, right? So it's quite real for us. Having said that, I'd like to echo what my colleagues are saying. That's precisely why Indonesia wants to talk about integration on the ASEAN regional setting, right? I think as far as the challenges, everybody knows it is challenging times. It is a given. The question is, what do we do about it, right? Now, echoing what PM Anwar has been saying, ASEAN has always been an evolution, not a revolution. And I think that's very pertinent in this day and age. That's precisely where ASEAN's strengths are. That is precisely why Indonesia feels that ASEAN integration is a key element in order to reduce those challenges for Indonesia itself. Now, in that context, yes, we are planning to send a delegation to Washington, D.C. The coordinating minister of the economy is leading that with respective ministries. We're still waiting for time. I think there's a lot of uncertainty even in D.C. as far as, who do we talk to, what type of policy makers that need to be gotten in touch. Just to give everybody here a bit of color, when you're talking to the USTR, it might be different than talking to the Commerce Department. So these are real issues that all of us have to face, and it is not going to be a one-off thing and trying to send a delegation and therefore negotiate. I don't think any of us in this room believe that that's going to happen as linear as that. So the complexity is there. I think the intent for us to send a delegation is real, but we also understand the complexities, and we also understand that the answers actually rely in this region.
Minister, you talk about some of the domestic challenges for Indonesia. The growth challenges, you say, are real. In terms of the support that potentially the government can provide, given the limited fiscal room at this moment, what are we realistically expecting at this point?
Let me try to address the perception that there is limited fiscal space to begin with, right? I think it's important to note, especially for investors in the room that are looking at Indonesia quite diligently, that our fiscal space has not changed. In other words, we're still projecting a budget about 3,600 trillion rupiahs. Our revenue is about 3,000, and our deficit remains in the 2.53 range. Nothing has changed. What has changed is a reallocation of the budget, right? So I think there's been a lot of misnomers in the public, in the press saying, oh, we're cutting the budget and so on and so on. That's not true. We're reallocating. The budget remains. So therefore, the fiscal, I think the fiscal prudence that Indonesia has always shown so far in the past decades remain. The Minister of Finance is coming tomorrow. I think she will be discussing this with colleagues from Malaysia, from Singapore, and from throughout the region. But I think as far as Indonesia is concerned, the fiscal condition actually remains quite strong. It's a matter of, I think, using that reallocation for productive uses.
So fair to say that you are confident of keeping the budget deficit target 2.5% of GDP
Yes.
for the year?
Yes.
There are also concerns about, you alluded to this just a short while ago, that reallocation when it comes to the dividends for SOEs, right? How is state financing potentially going to fill a bit of that gap that's now going to the second sovereign wealth fund, Danantara?
Well, we are looking at our revenue streams very closely, right? I think we understand, commodity prices have weakened, and that's obviously there's impact to that. But we have, even before the past week, Indonesia has done a lot of structural reforms. The Ministry of Finance has focused on a lot of tax reforms. We are minimizing, for example, minimizing the tax audit process in Indonesia by half. All right. All these things, I think, is in order for us to be able to focus on compliance for our revenue streams. I think it remains to be seen the results of that, but those reforms have been made, and I'm quite optimistic that they will produce the right results.
At the same time, it's been a bit of a transition from the spending on hard infrastructure for the past decade or so to the focus on soft infrastructure with the current administration, on education, on healthcare. How smooth are you seeing this transition, and what are you hearing from investors in terms of feedback?
I think, as far as investors are concerned, I think we do have to, Indonesia has to communicate better to investors. That's something that the government understands quite well. We hope to improve that. But mind you, this is our fourth month in office. Indonesia is a very big market, it's a very big, complicated country. We've been as an administration, we have been focused on internal cohesion. I think communication can be much better, right? But back to your point, Avril, about investments or the reallocation into soft. And at the end of the day, what we are doing is investing in our human capital. And that is a good thing. It has to start now. It's a long-term issue. That's why we're focused on education, on nutrition, and that's where the government budget is primarily focused upon. It's to increase the level of human capital development in Indonesia, and I would argue that's a good thing for the region.
Yeah, I just wanted to not comment so much on Indonesia, but to make a more general point that, we have these two objectives that many governments around the world will want to achieve. One is to continue to have sustained economic growth. That's important because that's linked to jobs, rising incomes for people, better quality of life. And then on the other hand, I think it's really to look at how do you then at the same time make sure that you hold the society together and not allow the divisive forces to be able to pull different groups in societies apart. And this is about strengthening the social compact, strengthening your social safety nets and your social support systems, including investing in human capital, in infrastructure, how to look after vulnerable groups in society. Now, if I may take a step back, I would say that in some of the societies, and perhaps maybe in the US as well, this is one of the reasons why we have what we have today. Because when there's growth, and certain segments of society feel that the growth has not benefited me. In fact, I've been left out. And the growth only went to certain small groups in society. It is not inclusive, it is not widespread enough. The tide is not lifting all boats. Then you have a pushback. Whereas if you embrace globalization, free trade, investments, and you translate that growth into tangible benefits for as many groups in society as possible, the growth can benefit a wide range of the population. Then I think you have the political and social support to continue with a pro-growth policy. So these two goals, if you do it well, they are mutually reinforcing. It's a virtuous circle. With growth, you have more resources. You can invest in your social safety nets. You can strengthen your social compact. And with that, you have better social cohesion, which then creates the stability for you to pursue pro-growth policies.
Lifting everyone at the same time, I think, is something that governments try to achieve, but it is easier said than done. you allude to this inequality. Cost of living concerns still weigh in Singapore in an election year. What will the government do if inflation flares up again, given this backdrop of tariffs and what that might mean for cost pressures?
So we have, in our latest budget, announced a series of different moves to help Singaporeans, Singapore families, to be able to cope with rising cost of living. Now, to be clear, inflation has come down compared to a couple of years ago. But because price levels are still at quite a high level, and if you have a lower inflation, it doesn't mean that prices have dropped. It just means that prices are increasing at a slower pace. So there's still some catch-up for incomes to be able to match the rising prices. And so that's why we thought it would be useful for us to provide, because we have, I would say, a healthy fiscal position this year, to be able to provide some help for Singaporeans to be able to cope with the cost of living. But we also made it clear that this is not a long-term solution, because in the longer term, you cannot solve the inflation problem by giving help alone. That is temporary, that is to cushion the impact. In the longer term, the more effective, more sustainable approach is to make sure that real incomes can rise, so that the increase in wages can outstrip the increase in prices, and you have a real positive real wage increase. And to do that, you need economic growth. And that is why, because now we are facing a more turbulent, more difficult external environment, we need to now look at how to cope with that, but also to look for new ways of growing, new engines of growth, new trade linkages. And as Prime Minister Anwar said earlier, ASEAN, this is a region where I think there's still a lot of growth potential, and we need to work doubly hard to make sure we enhance, speed up our regional economic integration.
If I can chip in on that side, if you look at the Malaysian position, yeah, when we started this journey, we focused about how do we reinvigorate the economy, how do we focus about turning the economy around, but on a holistic basis. Therefore, under our term of the Economy Madani framework, we talk about how do you lift the ceiling, we talk about how you lift the floor. The ceiling talks about how do you make the economy much more vibrant, how do you make the economy high-graded along the way, and in that process, talks about creating better quality jobs and stuff in the market. And in lifting the floor, it talks about how do you create better capacity for the citizenry to actually earn better income along the way. A lot of it goes back to job quality. A lot of it goes back to education capacity so that the citizenry can compete for those areas. And recognizing also not everybody will have the same opportunity sometimes, providing a social security net that can actually come in when necessary. So again, I don't think that game plan is going to change, because we need this game plan for the future of Malaysia in terms of restructuring it. Therefore, Malaysia's position, we understand that the tariff position is the challenge we exist today. We just need to figure out how do we navigate with the new complexity that's come in. And again, talking about market diversification, talking about integrating better within ASEAN gives us the capacity to create resilience. Right. Yeah? We're also talking about how do you create mechanisms that there's a little bit more self-sufficiency, self-resilience. And in the Economy Madani framework, what we've been able to do is actually activate our government-linked investment entities to actually reprioritize some of the investments domestically. So that creates a different engine of growth that can actually stimulate and provide a cushion during these temporary challenges that we actually have. So when we look at this, you've got to keep your eyes on the short term, the medium term, and the long term. You cannot just short focus and then forget the game plan in the future. That game plan guides us where we want to get to at the end of the day.
When it comes to this recalibration to still see strong growth for the likes of Malaysia, the forecast is 4.5% to 5.5% for this year. Can we still see above 5% growth for this year?
I think that there is a lot of efforts that is needed to look again. The reality is, yes, something dramatic has happened. Yeah? And to say that it will not affect the original plan is unrealistic. we have to address. It's changing. Yeah? Therefore, activating new markets, activating inter-Asian growth is our counter to that. Moderating the impact of what's challenge is coming in. So similar to Indonesia, that means active engagement with our US partners, and making sure they understand and we are able to chip away at the issues at play so that we can get to a better outcome, a better landing. So I think that's the focus of all countries at this point of time, right? Find the balance, activate new areas so that we can cushion elements along the way. And the key is work at it, yeah? Use this as a catalyst to actually change forward. And don't get, to some extent, what PM Anwar was trying to do was actually put in some optimism again, and use this as a crisis that will force ASEAN to change forward for the better and building better resilience into our system.
When you speak of injecting optimism, I think a lot of the growth that's Malaysia's seen in the past year or so is also from US tech investments. How confident are you that these big tech giants, given the current uncertainties, they remain committed to their investments to Malaysia?
I think the reality, right, the first instinct of any investor is that when it's very choppy, let's slow things down while we figure out what's going to happen. And that's natural along the way. So then the question to governments and policymakers inside it, how do you actually begin to induce motion forward? So in the inducement of motion forward, you have to address the challenges that they actually have, certainty of policy. You have to address the issues in terms of creating better other opportunities that they can deploy within the market. You address the certainty issue in terms of addressing long-term gains that they need to do along the market. Say, for example, if Malaysia aspires to high-grade its economy, build a better quality of industries coming in, investing in education-led things is the right, no-regret move. We will continue to do that because then it's talking about creating the seeds to continue to give the investors confidence that you have made the right decision, stay your course, and so on. Do we need to deal with the US in terms of their challenges in the tariff, the understanding, to create a trading environment again that is useful? Yes, we do. Yeah? But a practical consideration while investing for the future needs to also occur.
Would you be able to share a bit more on what you're hearing from some of the tech giants in terms of how they're viewing the investments in Malaysia or even the region?
I think when you look at the Malaysia space in the ANI and the semiconductor space, the reality is we've got a decent ecosystem that's actually running. We need to continue to keep the ecosystem running on that basis, right? So there is fear at this point of time, will tariff will artificially shift motions along that line. So how do you tackle the imbalance of tariff? The imbalance in tariff is partly handled by active negotiation with the US, but also bringing along the investor together with us to say, actually, do you really want to hurt your own entities that are actually in the market? Because we are providing a fair, transparent, and conducive environment for them to prosper along the way. It's not about just Malaysia causing the imbalance to the US. So I think there's a lot of redress in terms of making sure, understanding why this tariff approach was taken, and then removing the uncertainty along that line and giving confidence to the investor and also to the US in being able to do it. The second element is take control of certain things that we want. Yeah, so one of Malaysia's strengths at this point of time is financial liquidity in the market is very high. Our institutions are actually very cashed up. Yeah? And the ability of our institutions to work together from a private market sort of view, to work with our local domestic ecosystem can also offer new things. So can we create a secondary ecosystem along the side so that we also are able to lift ourselves up along the way, not necessarily fully dependent on foreign direct investments also at the same time. So I think you cannot solve the problem with one magic bullet. You have to look at it at a whole range of things that you have to execute, but execute it well, you will have the resilience needed for the longer term.
When we talk about investments in capital markets, Indonesia's assets have really come under pressure this year. I'm wondering, Minister, what sort of discussions are you having with the likes of your colleagues at Bank Indonesia?
Oh, we I think Bank Indonesia, as in the last, we've seen in the past 24 hours or 48 hours, they've been very active, yeah, vis-a-vis the rupiah. So we talk to them all the time, right? I think as far as capital markets are concerned in Indonesia, the regulatory framework, I may add, is there, right? We have what we call a financial omnibus law that was created in 2023. There's a regulatory framework in order to deepen those capital markets. Obviously, we can't do that by ourselves as well. It's also how we integrate with the other ASEAN markets as well. And I think that's something that needs to be considered very seriously. I think right now, with the conditions that are going around or the issues that are facing the world right now, it behooves us to make that a priority and talk to Malaysia, to Singapore about this. So I think there's, I'm quite optimistic as far as identifying what needs to be done in the future. I think most of the countries in ASEAN, the ASEAN member states, have been discussing many things for whether it's the capital markets, whether it's the ASEAN grid, it's there, right? I think it's a question of how do we enhance that, right, Minister, or how do we fasten that? I would like to address what my colleagues are saying about ASEAN economic integration just a bit more, right? I think it's very clear that the intent is there. Within 24 hours, our leaders spoke to each other, right? As Prime Minister Anwar said this morning, the political will is definitely there, right? I think the challenges are about execution. It's about prioritization. And it's about finding what the links are as far as bilaterals or multilateral, regional, and whether it's in energy, whether it's in capital markets. But I think that's the next step that needs to be done, which is to sit down together and come up with perhaps a list, right? Whether it could be on a project basis in terms of sectors. I believe that our supply chains can be enhanced. Malaysia, for example, I think the critical minerals that we have in Indonesia can be a supply to Malaysian semiconductors, for example. Vietnam, the textiles of Indonesia might be able to link up with the garment industry. I mean, but I think right now, since things are changing so fast, it behooves us to also change as fast as what the problems are and create new opportunities.
Minister Chi, how are you viewing the current turbulence in stock markets? I mean, we saw just a day ago the benchmark plunged by the most on record. You shared with me earlier that authorities did not intervene to stabilize. How are you viewing all this?
Well, I think stock market, the price movements reflect people's concerns, investors' concerns about the real economy. So if you want to have a more sustained, more effective way of lifting the stock markets, you have to first of all address the concerns about the real economy, restore confidence amongst investors, provide the certainty for people to continue to invest, for businesses to continue to make those long-term plans. So I think that has to be our focus, whether is it individual governments within our own countries or regionally, to give confidence and stability for businesses to make those investment decisions. And then the other one I thought is very important is when we think about regional integration, put ourselves in the shoes of the investors, okay? These days, when people think about investments, it is sometimes, especially for big operations, they may not put all the operations in one location because they want to try and optimize where to put certain functions. So they may put some of the functions in country A, some in country B, some in country C, but then through the supply chains and through the digital control systems. They're then able to coordinate the operations for the company as a whole. But then they make full use of the competitive advantages of the different locations. Now, if we think about this as part of our plan for ASEAN economic integration, then just using as a microcosm of that, what PM Anwar spoke about, the Johor Singapore Special Economic Zone, that is actually what we hope to achieve. So instead of seeing this project as a zero-sum game, i.e. companies will move from Singapore to Johor or Johor to Singapore, and you're just shifting, reallocating. That's not how we see it. Actually, both countries see this project as something that can have a win-win, because we hope to be able to attract new investments that are today not here. But if they come, they may then want to put part of it in Singapore and part of it in Johor. And if we can then strengthen the connectivity, facilitate the movement of people and goods between the SEZ and Singapore, then I think we benefit both, both economies.
As you say, it's really about the ecosystem, but is it to say
Yes.
that at this moment, given the current ructions, that authorities are ruling out intervention?
You mean about the stock market? Well, okay, we will never say never, but I would say be a bit careful about regulatory interventions, because the prices reflect market conditions. And I think we would, of course, have safeguards in the system. But what is important, I think it's really to look at the fundamentals. And the fundamentals in this case is that the markets everywhere are reacting to this shock that is being introduced by the tariffs. And as Minister Amir said, after that, a lot of investors are holding back because of the uncertainty. So it has a first-order effect, but also a second-order effect in slowing down growth. So make no mistake, I think in the near term, I can't think of any country that will be able to escape the economic headwinds. So growth in the short term for everyone will be hit. And that's why the stock markets are reflecting that less optimistic or more pessimistic, higher risk kind of scenario. But it doesn't mean that we can't mitigate this or we can't get ourselves out of this difficult situation. But what it means is we have to work even harder to be able to open up, speed up, team up.
What would this mean for longer-term reforms? At a time when Singapore is trying to revitalize its stock market, do those priorities kind of take a bit of a backseat given the near-term considerations? Just very quickly, if you can.
We won't slow down our reforms. I think if anything at all, we should press on. The moves that we want to make are not looking at short-term changes, but we're really looking at how we can make our stock market more attractive, how to strengthen the competitiveness of our ecosystem as a whole. So we will press on with those moves, but we got to be realistic.
When can we expect the second tranche?
We have said that we will do so later this year. But the more important point is this: we have to look at the fundamentals, because you can change the attractiveness and the rules of your stock market, but if the fundamentals of the real economy, the global economy, remain pessimistic and investors have no confidence, businesses have no certainty, I don't think you are able to revive any stock market. To revive a stock market, it has to be tied to a revival of the economic prospects and the underlying economic fundamentals. So we have to fix that. That's, to me, a more critical focus. We've got to make sure that the world trading system, the investment ecosystem, and how countries work together, how we can continue to promote trade and investments by companies, I think that is going to be a very important and, I would say, key priority for all countries.
We have just a couple of minutes left on the clock, but I'd just like the ministers of Indonesia and Malaysia to, at this point, also weigh in when it comes to the growth priorities for Malaysia, for example. Obviously, a lot of that tech focus. We talked earlier about the integration of the digital economy. What else do you think Malaysia can do at this point?
Again, as I alluded to just now, the clarity of what we want to do for a reform of the economy, that has not changed. Therefore, the Economy Madani framework is clearly in place, and the execution through our NIMP, NETA program will continue to go at pace, because these are structural, fundamental elements that must be sustained. What we need to do is to look, like Indonesia is suggesting, like reprioritization of certain things, so that we can cushion the blow during the challenging period. Yeah. So, for example, if there was a way to activate a better market environment, whereby private markets in Malaysia are much more robust than they are today, suddenly we provided some liquidity into the market to allow businesses to thrive along the way. If we're able to simplify regulatory environment, yeah, and allow a lot of better ease of doing business, then competitively we are better stated than a lot of other people. If we're able to provide better infrastructure capacity, hard infrastructure, soft infrastructure, we will always look better in order to underpin investments coming in. So I think that's what Malaysia will focus on. Yeah, understand, of course, that in the reprioritization, certain things may take priority in terms of cushioning blows. Yeah, but you cannot delay reform. You cannot do the things that are necessary and say that can wait to a different period, because reform will secure the success of the country going forward.
Minister, when it comes to Indonesia, maybe some closing remarks from your end as well on this.
Indonesia sees various growth. We need to find new growth engines. That's a given. The current administration has been looking deeply into things. I think the need for food security is not just a domestic issue for Indonesia. Obviously, inflation in Indonesia is from foodstuffs, so we have to be able to be resilient in our food security. But having said that, if Indonesia is successful, we can become a basket for Asia in general, right? So I think that's the intent. That also provides, obviously, labor opportunities. But we also are looking at things in the digital side, for example. So it's a mixture of many things, precisely because Indonesia is such a big country. There's no one sector that can actually push things through. It has to be a combination. I think we will continue on the industrial policy of President Jokowi in terms of downstreaming, right? That's also a very strategic initiative, and it will be continued under President Prabowo. And of course, we have to find other sectors that can provide jobs, right? I think manufacturing has been quite difficult in the past couple of years. It's a question of finding what other sectors can actually provide jobs for the big Indonesian population. Some people believe that tourism is a low-hanging fruit in Indonesia, with many multiplier effects and so on and so forth. So I think it's the current administration is looking at these engines of growth very, very succinctly. I think it was the first couple of months have been focused on the priorities of the president. The next half was to go to the investment community and say these are our growth engines. But I think with what's happening in the world right now, it's also the third factor, which is again regional cohesion.
It's a period of transition. Ministers, it's been a real pleasure. I look forward to seeing more ASEAN integration. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Honourable Ministers, for sharing your insights, and Avril, of course, for moderating that excellent discussion. May I ask that you all take a quick group photograph on this occasion. All eyes towards the camera, please. Honourable Ministers, as well as Avril. Thank you so much. Photographers, to the fore, please. All yours.